Yes, hello and welcome to the Back Post, the K-League United podcast, proudly sponsored by Record Pizza and in association with TNT FC, everyone's favourite K5 club beyond football. But it's Paul Neat here, arriving late at the Back Post with a later than usual, but also longer than usual look at the back pages. We shall begin, as always, with the newspaper reaction, namely the Sports Chosun. I have a copy of Monday and Tuesday's editions. Now, Monday's edition ran with BTS, would you believe? BTS didn't even put on the best performance in Seoul last weekend. But they are the main story, which is interesting. But it also seems that BTS aren't exempt from injury concerns. RM passed the late fitness test, but instead had to do more of a sitting role. Perhaps he should have been called DM for the night rather than RM. But we're not here to discuss BTS. The main story, K-League-wise, in this edition of Sports Chosun on Monday was about FC Seoul. It was the best performance in the capital over the weekend, and they did more than an hour, unlike a certain 7-member group. But the main story here is about how Seoul are beginning to blossom beautifully following the club's first ever 4-match winning run to start a new season. 5-goal explosion against Gwangju. Maybe it was FC Seoul who had the dynamite. The article was very spring-themed, and spring imagery gets used a lot when talking about a club or a player has turned things around. So no surprise here, but Seoul really are blossoming. I think that's what the point is people are trying to make with this. And also appears as though Kim Ki-dong has some friends in the media. Of course, one swallow doesn't make a summer, or what would the spring version of that be? One warm day doesn't make it spring, or one blossom doesn't make it spring, but it's been a good start. Even with a game fewer played, Seoul are top of the table. And the main picture, actually, is a good example of the creativity of K-League fans when it comes to making banners. It says, let's write history together. The Korean word for history is yoksa, which has sa in it, and sa can also mean 4. So they've made the sa in yoksa, history, 4. So reference to the 4 wins. Of course, they did make history. They did make it 4 wins from 4 for the first time ever in the club's 43-year history. Underneath is a bit about Ulsan. And the picture there of Lee Dong-kyung, and for good reason. It says 18 shots, but no goals. Ulsan's pursuit of 4 straight wins was a non-starter. And neither was Lee Dong-kyung, as we'll get to later. But it's his picture, and it mentions underneath how he wasn't quite fit and was subbed on and off again. On the right, it mentions Incheon's first win, their first since returning to K-League 1. And underneath, Busan Park, 1 goal and 3 assists between Christian Renato and Kim Chan. Busan beat Daegu to jump up to second. Really big win, a statement win for Busan there over Daegu. In Tuesday's paper, though, I was delighted to see that K-League was the lead story in Tuesday's Sports Chosun, and as you might expect, it is about FC Seoul. So, the headline is about what they're calling an inter-league supermatch, with both FC Seoul and Suwon Bluewings starting the season with 4 straight wins. The headline, K-League Spring, the headline, K-League Bomb Sanguri, which usually means 2 forces working together. So you can see it as K-League Spring Surge driven by a 2-pronged push, or K-League Spring Charge led by a 2-pronged attack, if we're going for a more football-specific way of expressing it. So basically 4 straight wins for both Seoul and Suwon. The Supermatch, it says, is on hiatus, but its box office power endures. So the two really big teams that have started very well with the big attendances, will we see a return of that fixture next year? Probably, you would expect. Now then, story The next story is about Gimcheon versus Ulsan. Ulsan versus Gimcheon, a 0-0, another goalless draw. The headline in this story reads, "Another draw. A succession of low-scoring draws. Then will K-League become a boring league?" Well, let's hope not. And I would say that K-League has no chance of ever becoming boring. But a really well-thought-out article, well-researched article, it says that up until round 5, there have been 28 games and 14 of them have ended in draws. That's a 30% increase compared to the average over the last 5 years. All 14 have either been 1-1 or 0-0. And it says that teams are more concerned with trying to keep the ball rather than going for goal. So we've seen that said about even the Premier League. So I think the K-League will follow trends, football trends around the world, around in Europe and whatnot. So it's not really unique to K-League. But, with K-League, the first tiebreaker being goals scored, you'd think it would be more of an incentive to attack rather than just try and dominate possession. But as we've seen, teams like Daejeon have controlled games, but they've had to play against low blocks. Even Jeonbuk had a low block in that 1-0 win for Jeonbuk last Saturday. More on that later. The next story on page 8, we go all the way through to page 8, and it is about the youngest debutant in K-League 2, 16 years and 11 months. It is Seoul Ilan's Andrew Wan. Now, his dad was sat on the bench for his debut when Seoul Ilan played Cheonan City and drew 0-0 last weekend. For good reason. His dad is coach An Sung-nam, who played in K-League. You may remember his name. He said that he was in a daze watching on. It didn't quite feel real seeing his 16-year-old son make his K-League 2 debut. The report also references the fact that his dad was initially against the idea of bringing his son into the first team picture at Seoul Ilan, but Kim Do-kyun was able to persuade him to think otherwise.